In this tutorial, we will review the steps and processes to justify conclusions once the collection of credible evidence has been completed. As a result of completing the tutorial, you should be able to engage in discussions of the evidence collection and justify conclusions. This quote from the CDC Program Evaluation Handbook is helpful and helps us take a more holistic view of the steps that are taken after the collection of data and evidence. Typically, we refer to the steps after data and evidence collection as analysis. However, any results of an analysis have to be interpreted through the lens of the program logic model and the stakeholders. This flowchart outlines these steps for us. While we are analyzing the data, we are also applying the program standards to determine what the findings are actually telling us. The interpretation step is comparing the findings to the standards that are decided prior or while the data is being interpreted. The outcomes of the comparison allows you to then make judgments with regard to the merit or worth of the program. The checklist provided for Step 5 focused on the important considerations when interpreting the findings. It is important not to take the findings simply at face value, but rather approach them with a healthy amount of skepticism. Evaluations can oftentimes be political. These could be instances where there will be a stakeholder who is vested in either positive or negative findings from the evaluation. The more that the evaluation team is critical of the findings, the harder it is for others to poke holes in the analysis and the interpretations of the findings. On the next slides, we will see a list of tips for interpreting findings. Paying attention to these tips can help ensure more rigorous interpretations of the findings. It is not essential to be able to address all of these tips, but the more that are addressed, the stronger the arguments for the findings will be. We'll go over several of these tips in more detail in the next few slides. However, here are a couple of considerations. The findings should never go further than the defined parameters of the evaluation. To do so risks the credibility of the evaluation. Bias is important to address. Bias can be conscious or unconscious. Because data is collected, analyzed, and interpreted by people, there are many opportunities for bias to creep into the process. Therefore, it is important for evaluators to reflect on their own potential biases towards the program recipients, or the outcomes of the evaluation. The more that can be understood about the context of the program, the adherence to the process and procedures during program implementation, and the program staff and participants, the better. When understanding the results, it is important to try to consider different factors that have the potential to influence the outcomes. For example, if you have a multiple set of classrooms that are involved in the program, an important activity in the program was for the teacher to email a note to the students, and then one of the teachers forgot, you would anticipate different outcomes for the classroom with the teacher that forgot, and that should be documented. Here are some common ways that data are analyzed. We typically analyze quantitative data by reporting counts or percentages. Depending on the type of quantitative data, we could apply statistical analyses to describe the data set with things such as averages and standard deviations. With more complex data sets, we could make predictions using inferential statistics. Qualitative data would be information such as narrative responses, interviews, journal entries, or observation logs. A common way to analyze these types of data are through thematic coding. Mixed methods of analysis are often used when both types of data can be collected and used to triangulate findings. For instance, a survey, which also provides a field to provide additional information to justify the rationale for how they rated a criteria, is a common example of mixed methods data collection. When using mixed methods, the goal is to capture more information about the context of the study and to use one type of data to help further explain the results of the other. Setting performance standards is done by the stakeholders to determine what the threshold or criteria will be to determine whether a program is being successful or unsuccessful. During this step, it is important to take into consideration the program design and the context. A simple example could be if any activity in the program If an activity in the program is that all the participants are required to submit an abstract for consideration to present at an academic conference, the standard would likely be different than if the same expectation were encouraged but optional. Making judgments is the final step in the interpretation of the findings. In this step, stakeholders are making judgments about the merit and worth of the program based on the results compared to the standards that were established by the stakeholders. If we look at our UMass Amherst Research and Undergraduate Education program, we have already determined what our research questions, indicators, and collection techniques will be. So now our group has established performance standards. For our first set of research questions, our performance standards are going to focus on the ratio of research projects to students. Our standard is for a 1-to-1 ratio. We will look at a comparison between the number of projects focused on each challenge area over the 3 years of the program to determine whether or not each challenge area receives equal focus. Finally, we would like to determine what opportunities for scholarly activities the program is creating for students. For our second research question, our standards will be focused on the direction of change in response to an annual community survey over the 3 years that the program was in place. We'll continue our example by looking at the findings and exploring some possible interpretation of them by the committee. We find that our number of students completing the program and the number of research projects is equal, so this performance standard is met. With 10 students accepted per year and the program running for 3 years, we would see 10 projects for each challenge area. While close, we see that some variation across programs. This may cause us to go back and explore why we chose that as a performance standard. It turns out that one of the members of the team thought it was part of the application review criteria for selecting students, that each area of interest received the same number of students. Upon further review, it was a desired factor but not required when the program was designed. As such, the group decides that the variation between the challenge areas is adequate to say that this standard has been met. Our final finding for our first research question is that there were 15 poster submissions, 5 workshops, and 10 paper presentation submissions made as a result of the students' research questions. Given that these are undergraduate students, the committee felt that it was an appropriate distribution. There was some interest in taking a deeper look into the venues that these proposals are submitted to see how many were accepted. Our final set of performance standards are looking at community impact by reviewing the findings of an annual community survey. Our final set of performance standards are looking at community impact by reviewing the standards of an annual community survey distributed to members of the community. The standard is to see an increase in awareness and a decrease in concerns. Upon exploration, the trend for awareness increased to a level that was statistically significant when compared to the baseline survey. The concern decreased, but not to a level that was statistically significant. The first standard is met. The second standard is not met, but the committee interprets the shift as being a positive trend and plans to use it in their proposal for additional funds to continue the program. With additional time spent working within the community, they feel that they would continue to decrease the community concerns.